the end of freeloading. Nobody likes freeloading, but nobody knows exactly how to get rid of it. Freeloading comes in many different forms, and we all have our pet peeve and pet particular form of freeloading that we have the most objection against. There's the beggar on the street, but there's also the person who makes use of government programs without there actually being a need. They design their life around being able to qualify for the benefit that the government is providing. But the government itself is a freeloader. Not that the government doesn't do anything for its money, but it lives off of the work of others, and there is no accountability to the people that it lives off of for what it's costing them. So while we can say we need some form of government, some form of administration, we can't specifically state that everything the government does is worthwhile. And so there's always this tension between the acceptance of government and the realization we have no control over it or the cost that it's creating. A less visible form of freeloading, and one not normally encapsulated by the term, is capitalism. We know that communism is inherently not cost effective, and so it freeloads in the sense that it creates costs that ought not to have been created, and somebody has to pay them. So the communist or socialist government freeloads off the backs of the captured population. But capitalist enterprises also create costs they can't pay, and the most obvious example of this is when they go bankrupt. Now, the capitalist is very particular about who gets to have a say in how the operation is run, predicated on the idea that it was the capitalist who capitalized the operation. Not going to go into this with any depth, but the point is that because the assumption is that the capitalist capitalized the business, and so no one has any authority over the property that supposedly belongs to the capitalist, doesn't take into account the fact that through perhaps graft, corruption, death, injury, incompetence, stupidity, you name it, the company loses business, perhaps even goes bankrupt. Well, the very term bankruptcy means the company can't pay for costs that it's created, and oftentimes the failing company actually seems to go out of its way to create as many costs as it can before it goes under, even to running up huge bills with local merchants of pizza and other fast foods and office supplies and so on. It creates accounts and then runs them up and doesn't honor the obligation that it has. And then you get to the employees and so on. All kind of people suffer the consequences of the business entrepreneurs' decisions, and yet let's say the employees are seeing the boss doing some really dumb or incompetent things, especially the way he manages the company. They have no say in this, and their life is made incredibly difficult because of having to live under these kind of ineffective and unethical management, even irrational management. So at least at that point, the company freeloads off of society and future generations. The cost of its poor management practices are downloaded onto society and future generations. When we get to democracy, we're faced to the reality that democracy is very little more than a tyranny of the majority. The majority gets to, if it's a direct democracy, they get to vote what the minority is going to pay for, what they're going to live under, because even if we're not talking about a specific levy against the minority, and even say the majority pays for the program, the minority still has to live under it. For example, the idea of gender identity being a personality disorder or personality aspect or factor, and that you can choose the personality in the same way that you choose your preferred a style of clothing. That's quite reasonable within the realm of the individual, and it's not to say that there's a specific cost attached to it for the Christian community, but they have to live under the ramifications and the impositions that this kind of policy generates. So if the majority decides to validate gender identity, this is still a social situation or a culture that a dissenting minority has to deal with. So it's not the conventional view of freeloading, but it still creates a cost onto the community, in the sense that if the community decides to allow children to dominate the family and to make their own moral decisions and determine their own lifestyle, and this results in an increase in gun violence and social disruption and greater policing and all that. This is a loss of value to the other rest of the community, because the community has a certain value, and peace and security are social goods, and increase in crime is a loss of value of the community. It's a destruction of our social goods. More crime means less peace, and peace is what we value. So we're losing peace and getting crime. So if the peace is a credit, the crime is a debit, and because of policy decisions, the credit is being systematically removed from our accounts, and we haven't got any say in this. So in a way, the policy regarding children is creating costs for us to pay, us meaning the community. So then the question becomes, how do we stop freeloading? And it's a huge problem. And so generally the idea is that we try to reduce the size of government. We try to limit the impact of government programs, or we try to change the programs so they're less impactful. We try to make sure that capitalists can't download too many costs onto their workers, like for for one example, forcing them to provide insurance in case they have their workers injured and so on. There's one more case just want to touch on, and that's volunteering. Volunteers are people who volunteer their time, and they see a need and they fill it, and that's good. There's no taking away from the merit of this, the righteousness in which this thing is done. But the group that accepts this, who says, oh yes, you can come and work for me for nothing, I won't pay you, that's no problem, that's freeloading. That's accepting payment for costs that we're creating. If our hospital is creating costs it can't pay for, it's very wonderful that somebody will get up and say, well, I'll pay the cost by working for nothing. And that's a good and even meritorious thing and a good stopgap measure. But this isn't something that the rest of us should sit back and accept and say, oh, well, the debt is taken care of. This person is paying for our costs. You can't. It's not that you can pay the whole cost, but the point is, we shouldn't be accepting this situation. We should be doing what we can to rectify it. So if we're not, then we're freeloading. And so again, we come back to, how do we stop the freeloading? How do we stop us from freeloading? How do we stop others from freeloading? And the only way we can do this is through accounting. We have to be accountable, meaning we have to live by accounts. And to do this, we need a ledger, and we need an administrator of the ledger, and this is what we call an exchange. The exchange is the holder of our accounts, and we each are accountable to the exchange, or to the ledger, and we each have an account with a debit and a credit column. And what we do, we get credit for, and what we don't do, or we consume or do in destructive, we get debited. And so the freeloader, which in this case is us, we get debited for what the volunteer does, and the volunteer gets credited. So there is no unpaid volunteers, because once somebody does something of value, they get paid by the exchange. Just that. It's as simple as that. Somebody does something of value, they get paid. It doesn't matter what it is. If the only way he doesn't get paid is if he's being debited because he's consumed. So the person that works at a hospital, they get paid for the work they do at a set rate, a living wage. The exchange sets a living wage, and this is what the person gets paid. And if the person goes and spray paints the hallway of the hospital, this is a debit, and the malefactor gets debited. And the person who cleans up this mess, preferably the malefactor, but regardless, the person who cleans up the mess gets paid for the work. And the exchange is the account holder, and in the exchange debits and credits people's accounts according to the value they're creating or the value they're consuming. And it's as simple as that. It eliminates freeloading immediately, but we just need to set up that kind of system. And this is what we call the exchange system, exchange model of society. And we got more videos on this, and also on our website, which is Locavores United, with a line in the middle. And that's it. I mean, freeloading is wrong. If you want to eliminate freeloading, learn how to create exchange. Exchanges create economic development, and they eliminate freeloading, because freeloading eliminates or negates economic development. It's all quite simple. You're either adding value or negating value, and we need to be accountable. And to be accountable, we need an exchange, because we need a holder or an administrator of a ledger. That's it. That's all it takes.